So I started learning Spanish seriously about a month ago. I was born and raised in South Korea and lived there until I was 21 before I moved to Canada. So Korean is my first language, and I learned English as a second language, and now I want to learn Spanish as my third language. So why did I choose Spanish? Back in 2019, I traveled to a small town in Spain called Frigiliana, and I just fell in love with it. It was like heaven for me. Beautiful, quiet, warm weather, and good food. And since then, my goal has been to move to Friliana, to live there, make friends with neighbors, and just live a simple, happy life. And it's also one of the most spoken languages in the world. Being able to speak English and Spanish, I'll be able to communicate with most people when I travel around the world. My very first experience with Spanish was when I was 17. I picked French as my second foreign language in high school, so I didn't know anything about Spanish. And one day I saw my friend's Spanish exam paper on her desk, and it had this weird upside down question mark in front of the sentence. So I asked her what it was, and she said it was just how Spanish people write a question. And at that time, I thought it was a really silly and weird language that I would never want to learn. And here I am, after 18 years, despite that weird question mark, I'm learning Spanish and loving it. So when I decided to learn Spanish seriously, I set myself a learning goal. I decided to achieve an intermediate level of fluency within just 6 months. I thought it was quite an ambitious goal, so I needed a strategy. First, I looked back at how I learned English. The most important thing that helped me learn English fast was doing a lot of listening. And let me tell you more about that. I couldn't really speak English until I was 18. I mean, I learned it at school, but it was pretty useless in terms of being able to communicate with the English speakers. And I really wanted to be fluent in English because since I was little, I loved the American culture I saw in Hollywood movies, and I really liked the sound of the language too. So while looking for ways to learn English, I came across this book a Korean guy wrote. He was a retiree in his 60s and wrote about how he learned to understand spoken English in his 60s. And in his book, he said before he retired, English was always a big challenge at his work. His company dealt with a lot of foreign buyers, and his colleagues expected him to speak English fluently with them just because he was well educated. But he actually couldn't really understand them very well. So after he retired, he decided to learn English, and what he did was listen to BBC radio every day. And he tracked how often and how long he listened to it. I think he said he did it for about 2 years until one day he realized that he was understanding what they were saying on the radio. And when this happened, he added up the hours he spent listening, and it was 297 hours. So his point was that if you listen to English for an hour every day, you'll be able to understand it within just a year. So I was very motivated by his experience and applied the same method. Instead of BBC, I listened to CNN News just because I wanted to have an American accent. And at first, I didn't understand anything. It sounded like a whole chunk of a sound. But later, I could hear a word, 2 words, 3 words, and then one phrase, two phrases, and so on. I remember there being a time where I could hear every single word of a sentence, but wouldn't necessarily understand what it meant because I didn't know the meaning of the words. This is actually also the way babies learn their native language. Before they speak, they listen to their native language being spoken to them or around them for around a year. Though I started with CNN initially, it was pretty boring for me to listen to it for a long time, as I normally don't like watching the news. So I had to find something I would really enjoy listening to, and when I was in my 20s, it was Sex and the City. I'm not sure if I would have liked the show that much if I watched it in my 30s, but back then, I just loved it and could watch it over and over and over again, which was perfect. I watched it at home with a DVD player, and when I was outside, I listened to the audio with an MP3 player. I never counted the hours, but I watched them every day for over 2 years. And it worked for me too. With this method, I got to an intermediate level, so when I first arrived in Canada, I was already able to communicate without too much trouble. So I applied this method to learning Spanish as well. The difference between learning English and Spanish is that I already knew a lot of English words from school before I started focusing on listening. But with Spanish, I had to start from scratch. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to test learning a new language, like how a child would learn their native language, but as an adult. I obviously can't create the exact same situation, but I wanted to make it as close as possible. There are 4 things I focused on. 1, the most important, lots of listening. 2, learning vocabulary. 3, practice speaking with Spanish speakers. 4, learn but not study the language. What I mean by that is, so it has to be fun and natural, not forced. Babies don't learn their language by focusing on grammar and reading, nor taking classes and tests. So I decided to just focus on listening and speaking first. So for listening, I found a bunch of YouTubers that talk about what I'm interested in. One of them is Jordi Wu. He talks about being positive and productive. Also, there's no background noise in his videos, so I can focus on the sound of his voice better. Luisito Comunica, he travels around the world, and I like watching him explain what he's experiencing in a new place. And there's España con Juan. His channel is about teaching Spanish, but he doesn't use any English and speaks slowly. He says his channel is for people at an intermediate level and not for a complete beginner, but I still just watched it. I also watched some Spanish TV shows and movies on Amazon Prime and Netflix with English subtitles. And also watched some American shows I watched before with Spanish audio this time. And it worked great because I already knew the storyline, so I could just focus on the sound of Spanish. For vocabulary, kids learn a lot of vocabulary just by living their day-to-day lives, by listening to and communicating with their parents or people around them. And this is a situation I can't create as an adult living in an English-speaking country. So I had to learn vocabulary, but I didn't want to memorize a list of words for the sake of memorizing them. So I used Duolingo for this. It's fun but very effective as you learn words and sentence structures in a gamified way. What was most important for me was that I do it every day, even if it's just a little bit. I set myself a goal of doing 1 lesson a day at the very minimum, which takes about 5 minutes or less. But I usually do it for 10 to 15 minutes. Duolingo provides grammar tips for each lesson, but I normally don't read them because I don't want to study grammar and their quizzes are easy enough to guess the answer anyway. So by doing these easy quizzes, I'm picking up grammar and new words naturally. The app covers basic reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And although you probably won't become very fluent by just doing Duolingo, you get to cover the broad basic structure of the language, which I found very helpful and fundamental in learning Spanish from zero knowledge. And lastly, I had to create an environment where I could practice having a conversation with a native speaker, because this is the ultimate goal and what kids get to do all day, every day, and become fluent in their language. So I wanted to find a language parent. And by language parent, I mean someone who only speaks Spanish with me and works to understand what I say. They don't correct my mistakes, but instead confirm their understanding using the correct language. I started using Preply to find these language parents. It's the first platform I found on Google, but there are also other platforms like Verbaling and italki. In all these platforms, you can choose teachers based on their introduction videos, lesson fees, availability, and reviews from other students. I initially had just 1 Spanish language parent once a week, but after a couple of weeks, I wanted to practice more often and with different people. So now I have 3 language parents from Spain and 1 from Mexico, and meet with them 4 to 5 days a week. And each meeting is about an hour. As I'm not yet at the level to have a free conversation, I use Google Translate most of the time. There are 2 extra things that I did to make my learning more fun and effective. I changed my phone setting to Spanish. Sometimes I have to revert to English when I need to do something and don't know what's going on. But most of the time, I know what button I need to press, so it's an easy way to pick up more vocabulary. For example, I've learned the days of the week, months, the word find and cancel. I also wanted to do some reading, but didn't want to read a difficult book. Babies read easy children's books or their parents read it to them. So I looked for some children's books on YouTube and found a few, but didn't really like their drawings. So I searched in the Apple App Store and luckily came across this amazing app called Fabolingua. The drawings are pretty and it's an interactive children's book. I'm currently doing a 30-day free trial, but I will sign up for it after as it's a really fun and effective way to learn words and grammar naturally.
Un caballo, a horse, que se ríe, that laughs, de espaldas, on his back.
So, with all of this, how much did I learn in a month? I would say more than I expected. In terms of listening, I noticed the biggest improvement when I was watching this YouTube video the other day. When I first watched this a month ago, I didn't understand any of what he said. But when I watched it a couple of days ago, I realized that I was understanding what he was saying, and I was already 5 minutes into the video. I was so surprised that I was understanding him without subtitles. I mean, he's talking about one topic with images and texts, and he also speaks slowly, but I was still blown away by my progress. And I was like, wait, is this really happening? Can I understand regular TV shows as well? Also, when I speak with my Spanish language parents, I understand more and more things they say. Sometimes I understand the entire sentence, and other times I understand enough words to guess what they're saying or asking. It's much better than when I first started because back then all I could understand or say was hola and como estas. Also, although I'm still relying on Google Translate to speak with them, I'm using it less and less as I can put together more simple sentences myself. In terms of reading, I sometimes understand some YouTube video titles and comments without having to use Google Translate. And I also had a look at the sample B2 Delhi exam a month ago and couldn't understand a word at the time. But when I read it again recently, I could understand what the passage was about and some of the instructions and questions of the exam as well. Overall, in the past month, I feel like I cracked the outer layer of the Spanish language, and I'm excited about how much I can learn in the next 5 months and whether I can really achieve the B2 level of fluency by then. I'll keep posting my progress here and share what tools I use for learning. And with my experience, I hope to be able to help others learn Spanish more efficiently as well.